in addition to the fact that doing those things allows you to live longer. So so that's my thesis, right? So how would you get at that? Well, it's very difficult to do a randomized experiment. But if we look at Mendelian randomization, which again we've talked about many times in the past, but this is basically looking at um, genetic scattering of traits that we care about, and asking the question, how does that impact the parameter of interest? So if we look at Mendelian randomization studies that look at the relationship between muscle mass and mortality, they do find at least partial causality, rather than strength just being a proxy for general health. So one study that looked at, I mean, 350,000 Finnish biobank participants used a polygenic score as a proxy for grip strength. When they looked at that polygenic, its strength that is probably much more highly associated with, not just correlated with, but causally associated with mortality, cardiovascular disease, neurologic disease than muscle mass itself. So what I would say is, we talk about muscle mass a lot. We care about muscle mass a lot. It plays an important role in the metabolic function of muscle. But maybe above all else, just think of it as a great proxy for strength, not a one-to-one proxy. I know everybody listening to this has met a really wiry person who is insanely strong, and there are actually some people who have quite a bit of muscle mass, and yet they're not actually that strong. But if you exclude kind of the extremes and the bookends, there seems to be a reasonable mapping between muscle mass and strength. Again, in the show notes, we're just going to link to all of the places where these things have been discussed in great detail. The other thing to consider, which again, I think is something we fortunately don't have to think of under normal circumstances, but it really does matter when a person gets sick, is that muscle is indeed the reservoir for protein. So we don't store protein the way we store glucose and the way we store fat, right? So I think everybody's familiar with the idea that we store infinite amounts of fat, right? As much as our fat cells will get fat, we can store fat, and that can provide us with months and months of energy. We don't store that much carbohydrate, so we're kind of stuck there with our glycogen supplies. Of course, anything excess we'll store as fat. And we don't store protein in the traditional sense outside of the muscle itself. And so what that means is the more muscle you have, the less muscle you will end up losing in a period of illness or stress, like surgery, infection, hospitalization, burns, things of that nature. So again, I think this is a big part of why people with more muscle